The most important room in this story is not in Islamabad. It is in Moscow. Most people saw the photographs from Pakistan and focused on the obvious image Iran. As foreign minister arriving under fighter escort, received on the tarmac by Pakistan as foreign minister and the army chief, while oil sat above $100 and America kept quiet. That is dramatic. It is visual. It is the kind of thing television likes. But I think the real signal is not the arrival. It is the sequence. Iran made clear that after Pakistan comes Oman and after Oman comes Moscow. That means the last major power to hear Iran as real position before any final negotiating shape emerges is not America. It is Russia. And once you see that, the whole story changes, because diplomacy is not just about what a country says in public. It is about who hears the private version first. That is the heart of this story. I call it the first listener advantage. And I think it matters more than any polished press line coming out of Islamabad publicly. Everyone already knows Iran's headline positions. Iran says Hormuz cannot be treated as if Iranian sovereignty does not matter. Iran says uranium enrichment is a sovereign, right? Iran says there is no real negotiation under blockade conditions. Those are the public lines. America knows them. Pakistan knows them. Oman knows them. Every reporter covering this file has heard some version of them again and again. But every real negotiation has a second layer. The second layer is the private layer. It is not what a country says at the podium. It is what it is actually willing to accept if the right guarantees, the right language, and the right structure appear. That is where the real floor is, not the public floor, the private one. How long would Iran really pause something if the mechanism saved face? What wording on Hormuz would Iran tolerate if it could still claim sovereign authority? What happens to the uranium if Tehran refuses to hand it to Washington, but would accept third-party custody? What sanctions timing would actually move the Iranian calculation? Those are the answers that matter. And Russia hears them before America does. That is why I think people are underestimating the Moscow stop. They are treating it like routine consultation with an ally. It is much more than that. It is Iran making sure that the first major power to hear its actual flexibility is the same major power that can help sustain its resistance if talks fail. That is a very different thing. The structure behind this is already in place. In January 2026, Iran and Russia signed a 20-year strategic partnership treaty covering political, economic, security, and technological cooperation. This was not symbolic. It was designed to reduce the impact of Western pressure through systems outside the dollar structure. On top of that came a 2026 to 2028 consultations program, the first scheduled foreign ministry consultation mechanism of its kind between the two countries. In other words, this is not ad hoc diplomacy. This is a standing architecture. So when Iran goes to Moscow in the middle of a war and on the edge of a negotiation window, it is not improvising. It is executing a structure that was built before the war. And Russia is not listening empty-handed. The most important thing Russia brings to this conversation is leverage. Some of that leverage is diplomatic. Russia has a UN Security Council veto. Some of it is economic because high oil prices benefit Moscow. Some of it is strategic because Russia wants a post-war order in which America does not get to define the terms alone. But some of it is operational. Reporting has said Russia has been providing Iran with intelligence on the locations and movements of American troops, ships, and aircraft. That means Russia does not just understand the diplomatic situation, it understands the military pressure map surrounding the diplomacy. So imagine the conversation from Tehran's perspective. You are about to enter a critical round of talks. Before you let America hear where you might bend, you go to the partner that can help you endure if you refuse. You show that partner the private version of your position. And that partner, because it knows both your pain threshold and America's military posture, can tailor its own support to the exact level needed. That is the advantage. It is not just that Russia hears Iran first. It is that Russia hears the real Iran first. And then there is the uranium issue, which sits in the middle of everything. America's core demand revolves around neutralizing Iran's nuclear pathway. Russia has publicly offered an alternative structure. Let Russia take custody of Iran's enriched uranium. That is not a side issue. That is a competing answer to the most sensitive, unresolved problem in the negotiation. America hears that and sees danger. Because if Russia becomes custodian of Iran's uranium, America might win the optics of escalation. But Russia wins the architecture. Moscow would sit in the center of the most sensitive post-war file. Iran would not have handed its strategic material to its adversary. Russia would gain leverage over both Tehran and Washington. That is why the uranium question is bigger than a technical nuclear argument. It is about who gets to sit in the middle of the settlement. Now put the Moscow stop back into that picture. Iran goes to the country that already has a rival offer on the table for the uranium issue. Russia hears what Tehran can really accept. Russia adjusts its own proposal accordingly. Then America arrives to negotiate against a position that has already been shaped by a partner willing to absorb, store, delay, or politically frame the most explosive issue in the room. That is not a neutral sequence. That is Iran choosing the order in which power gets informed. And order matters. The side that hears the private floor first gets the design around it. The side that hears it second gets whatever remains. This is where the gap between mediator and partner becomes crucial. Pakistan may carry messages, Oman may soften edges, but a mediator hears what each side is willing to say to a mediator. A partner hears what each side is willing to risk saying to a partner. Those are not the same conversation, not even close. America will hear Iran's terms through a diplomatic filter. Russia hears them through a strategic relationship. That is why I think the public conversation around Islamabad is too shallow. It assumes America is negotiating with Iran. I think America is negotiating with a position that has already passed through Moscow's calibration room. That is a weaker position to negotiate against because the real flexibility may no longer be sitting in the room. It may already have been translated into what Russia is prepared to sustain. History actually gives us a useful parallel here. In 1973, before the Yom Kippur War and the oil crisis that followed, the Soviet Union was not a passive observer. It heard from its partners, calibrated its support, and entered the diplomatic phase without being surprised by what the other side could actually tolerate America. By contrast, often found itself negotiating against positions already reinforced by prior consultation. The point is not that history repeats itself line for line. The point is that first consultation creates second-order advantages. The side consulted first is not always the side that wins publicly, but it often shapes the limits of what can be achieved. That is exactly the risk here. There are two broad ways this can go. The first is the Russia-shaped deal in that path. Iran shares its private floor in Moscow. Russia calibrates its uranium offer, its diplomatic language, and its support commitments to fit just above that floor. Talks move forward. America declares progress. Iran claims it preserved dignity and sovereignty. Russia never appears as the star of the show. But the clauses that matter most bear its fingerprints. The uranium is handled in a way Washington can tolerate publicly and Tehran can survive politically. The shipping language is written in a way Iran can sell at home. The sanctions relief timing is structured around what Russia knows Iran actually needs. America gets the headline, Russia gets the architecture. The second path is even darker. Iran goes to Moscow, makes clear that current American terms are unacceptable, and it receives enough Russian backing to continue the endurance game in that world. Moscow does not need a dramatic intervention. It only needs to reassure Tehran that no fatal isolation is coming. The uranium offer remains on the table. The intelligence channel continues. The veto remains available. China continues absorbing Iranian crude through the dark fleet system. Oil stays elevated. Time stretches, talks do not formally collapse, but they do not meaningfully converge either. America leaves with process. Iran leaves with survival. Russia leaves with higher leverage and higher oil revenue. Both paths start the same way. Russia hears Iran before America does. Now, to be fair, there is an American counterargument, and it is not weak. Washington knows Iran and Russia are coordinating. Washington knows about the treaty structure. Washington knows Russia has floated a uranium solution. Washington is not blind. American intelligence can model a lot. It can estimate red lines. It can watch military movements. It can track diplomatic signaling. And there is an argument that a Russia custody uranium solution, however irritating strategically, could still serve American interests if it helps prevent a worse outcome. That is all true. But it still misses the most important point. The thing America cannot fully model is the private threshold Iran shares in Moscow and not in public. Intelligence can see capability. It can often see pressure. It can rarely see private willingness with total precision. That is what the first listener advantage is, not general awareness. Specific asymmetry. Russia does not need to publicly reveal what it learns. It only needs to quietly design around it. That is enough. So what should people watch now? First, watch the language of any Russia. Iran's statement after the Moscow stop. Joint diplomatic language is never random. If new wording appears around uranium custody, navigation, rights, sanctions timing, or settlement framework, then something meaningful was aligned. Second, watch whether any senior American official names the Moscow problem directly, not Russia in the abstract Moscow. As the place where Iran's position was shaped first, if Washington avoids naming that complication, it may be because naming it creates a confrontation it cannot afford before the next phase of broader great power diplomacy. Third, watch the uranium language in whatever framework eventually emerges. If a third party appears at the center of that clause, and especially if Russia appears there, then the hidden architecture of the negotiation was probably not built in Islamabad at all. It was built before Islamabad, in the room that heard Iran as real terms first. That is why I do not think this story is mainly about Pakistan. Pakistan is the visible corridor. Moscow is the strategic room. And if Russia hears what Iran is actually willing to accept before America does, then the most important American disadvantage in this negotiation is not military, not rhetorical, and not even economic. It is chronological. America's hearing second. And in negotiations like this, second can be too late.